Introduction. We have seen that consonants can be described and distinguished by their voicing and by their place of articulation. In this unit, we will look at the third feature of consonants, manner of articulation. A third feature of articulation, exercise 4.1. Think about the following sets of consonants. First of all, label them according to their voicing and place of articulation. Secondly, decide if the consonants in each set sound the same or different. The, la, the, ch, chara, ganga, bama. Comment. You should have labeled all the consonants as voiced. In set A, they are all alveolar. In set B, they are all post-velar. In set C, they are both velar, and in set D, they are bilabial. If this exercise was difficult, you should return to the previous units in order to learn the labels more thoroughly. You will also have realized that the sounds in each set do not sound the same because the consonants in each set share the same voicing and POA but sound different. This indicates that there must be at least one more feature of consonants that distinguishes these sounds. This third important feature of consonants is manner of articulation. This feature refers to how the air flows in the vocal tract. As we know, different sounds are produced by moving different articulators. We learned in the last unit that place of articulation refers to the place in the vocal tract where there is the greatest constriction to airflow. However, however, the degree to which the air is constricted is not the same for all cons- consonants, so place of articulation refers to the place of maximum constriction, but that maximum constriction may be more or less depending on the consonants in question. Manner of articulation is in part therefore concerned with the degree of stricture in the vocal tract, which refers to how close the articulators get when the sound is formed. For example, they may touch and form a firm seal, or approach each other with a small gap for air to escape. Manner diagram. One of the ways we can represent how articulators move in different degrees of stricture is through manner diagram, like the one in figure 4.1. In this diagram, a line is drawn to represent its articulator, and, and time is shown from left to right in figure 4.1. The lines indicate that one of the articulators stays still, while the other one approaches it, touches it for some time, and then moves away again. In figure 4.1, which line do you think represents the active articulator and which line represents the passive articulator? Comment. As you will hopefully remember from the previous unit, the active articulator is the one that moves, while the passive articulator is the one the active articulator moves towards. So in figure 4.1, the top line is the passive articulator and the bottom line is the active articulator. For example, the diagram might represent the sound the where the tongue approaches the alveolar ridge, touches it briefly and then moves away again. In only manner diagram in this unit, the top line represents the static passive articulator while the bottom line shows the movement of the active articulator. An example of manner diagram. Manner diagram for plosives. Manner diagram of articulation used in English. As in previous units, we will start by thinking about the different manners of articulation used in SSPE. For each one, we will describe the way the articulators interact. Look at the diagram and think about which sounds in English are produced with this manner of articulation. It is important for each class a manner of articulation to experiment with producing the sounds and establish if you can relate your own articulation to that described. 4.5.1 Plosives. Plosive sounds in English are p, b, t, d, k, g, and question mark. These are actually the sounds that are represented by the example manner diagram and figure 4.1 shown again in figure 4.2. Three stages are represented to begin with. The articulators are in their resting position as if a person were breathing normally. Then if we imagine the articulations for P, for example, the bottom lip approaches the top lip. This is called the approach phase of plosives. The bottom lip continues to approach the top lip until they touch. Although touching, the air from the lungs cannot escape and pressure builds up behind the closed lips. This part of the sequence is termed the whole phase. You may also hear plosives called oral stops. As the air in the oral cavity is stopped completely, then the bottom lip moves away from the top lip and the air escapes rapidly with the slight popping sound characteristic of plosives. This is called the release phase. If produced between vowels, for example, we can see that the plosives has wide oral release as the active articulator moves far away from the passive articulator in the release phase. The same sequence occur for all the other plosives, but of course different active passive articulators are involved. You may wish to try to describe the articulation of an alveolar or velar plosives. Fricative sounds in English are f, v, th, sh, j, sh, j. Try producing the English fricative sounds listed above. Hold each one for a while and concentrate on what you can hear. Do the sound have anything in common? Comment. Fricatives are characterized by the hissing sound that can be heard when they are produced, and this is hopefully what you will heard when practicing with the sounds above. A hissing hardened fricatives comes about because the air from the lungs is escaping through a small gap. The air becomes choppy and turbulent, and hissing is heard. So when a fricative is produced, the articulators come close together, but not so close that they touch. So figure 4.3, we call this narrow approximant. The small gap through which the air escapes causes the hissing noise, just as a small gap in a window can let in a draught, which you might hear as a whistling noise. Just as a small gap in a window can let in a draught, which you might hear as a whistling noise, it is important to note that the articulators may be touching at the side of the mouth, and you can probably feel this if you practice with fricatives such as sh or f. There is, however, enough of a gap for air to escape in the center of your mouth, and this is where the turbulence occurs. Proximant and lateral approximant. Proximant sounds in English are v, j, l, and r, including both r and v. Proximant sounds are rather like vowels in some ways. They are produced with little constriction in the vocal tract. so that air passage is not restricted as shown in Figure 4.4. They are formed when the articulators are positioned in wide approximant so that the gap between them is not narrowed enough to cause friction. If you go back to our cap in the window example, it might help you to think about the difference between frigatives and approximants. When the window is wide open, air can pass in and out freely and does not make a noise. We only hear the air when it is squeezed through a small cap and becomes turbulent. So the open window is like an approximant and a window letting in a draught is like a frigative. Obviously the analogy is not perfect because approximants are audible. However, they are audible because of the vibrations of the vocal folds, as if someone were playing a banjo outside the window and not because noise is produced in the mouth. Monodagon for a frigative, monodagon for an approximant. Exercise 4.4. In this exercise, we'll be trying to demonstrate the different types of airflow for approximant and English. First of all, put your articulators in the position for V. Try to hold them in the position, but do not try to speak or add any voicing. Now keep your articulators in the same place. Breathe in strongly for a few seconds and try to concentrate on where you feel cold air in your mouth. Do the same for j and r, and finally for l. Where do you feel cold air in your mouth? Is it on the side of your tongue or in the middle? Is it in the same for all four sounds? Comment for l. It is likely that you felt cold on the sides of your tongue. Well, you would have felt in the middle of your tongue. For the other sounds, if you are a labiodental r user, you will probably have felt here in the middle of your lower lip, as well as in the middle of your tongue. The experiment demonstrates that l is produced a little differently to the other approximants for v, j, and r, including both r and v version of r. There is an obstruction of the sides of the mouth, which you can feel if you produce these sounds and hold them for a time. Recall that the articulators are in wide approximant, and here this refers to what is happening in the middle line of the mouth. To identify the midline, it can help to imagine a line going from between your top front teeth back to the alveoli, dividing the mouth into the left and right sides. For loud obstructions is in the midline, and when you produce these sounds, you can feel the tip of your tongue resting on the alveolar ridge. The sides of the tongue, however, are lowered and in wide approximant to the palate. So this type of sound is called a lateral approximant. Lateral means side, and the label indicates that the airflow is around the sides of the tongue. All other approximants in English have airflow down the midline of the tongue and are called median approximant or simply approximants. Affricates. Exercise 4.5. To understand how an affricate is formed, try the following. Produce a ta sound followed very quickly by sh sound. What English do you hear? It will not be identical to an English sound, but will sound very close to one. Try the same with the followed by ch. The symbols will give you a clue too. The first sounds like the cha, cha, the sound of the start and the end of church, while the second sounds like the cha, church, cha. The sound that is start and end of judge. These are the only two affricates in English. Manual diagram for an affricate. From exercise 4.5, you will have identified that affricate sounds have elements of plosives and elements of fricative. In its fact, the approaches